Right now, as you watch this, people are dying. Not from a war, not from a pandemic, from something simpler, something preventable, something that's been killing people for over 30 years and shows no sign of stopping. In Bangladesh, 20 million people drink water laced with arsenic every single day. Not because of an industrial accident, not because of a chemical spill, because the wells that were supposed to save them are poisoning them instead. The World Health Organization calls it the largest mass poisoning in history. Millions have already developed arsenic-related illnesses. Hundreds of thousands have died. And the disaster continues because the solutions cost money, because the victims are poor, and because the world stopped paying attention decades ago. This isn't ancient history. This is happening right now, today, and the worst part, it was entirely preventable. The very organizations that built the wells knew the risk. They tested for bacteria but not for arsenic. They declared the water safe and walked away. So let's be clear about what happened. Let's be clear about who's still suffering. And let's be clear about why, after 30 years, almost nothing has changed. Bangladesh sits on the world's largest river delta. The Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna rivers converge there, creating a landscape of water. Floods are annual. The land is fertile but also dangerously prone to waterborne disease. For centuries, people drank from ponds and rivers. The water was full of bacteria. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid killed thousands every year, especially children. In the 1970s, UNICEF and the World Health Organization launched a massive public health campaign. The goal: provide clean drinking water to rural Bangladesh. The solution: tube wells, simple hand pumps that could tap into groundwater 20 to 30 meters below the surface. Groundwater was considered safe because it was filtered through layers of soil and sand. No bacteria, no pathogens. Just clean water. Between 1970 and 2000, millions of tube wells were installed across Bangladesh. It was hailed as one of the great public health successes of the 20th century. Deaths from waterborne diseases dropped dramatically. Child mortality fell. UNICEF published reports celebrating the achievement. Development agencies called it a model for the world. And then people started getting sick. The first cases appeared in the late 1980s. Skin lesions, dark patches on the palms and soles of feet, hardened, scaly skin. Doctors didn't recognize it at first. It looked like a rare tropical disease. But the cases kept increasing. By the early 1990s, health workers realized they were seeing symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning. Arsenic occurs naturally in the soil and rock of the Bengal Delta. For millennia, it sat harmlessly underground. But when millions of tube wells were drilled, they punctured the aquifer and allowed arsenic to leach into the groundwater. The wells that were supposed to provide safe water were delivering poison, and no one had tested for it. The tube well programs tested for bacteria, for nitrates, for salinity, but not for arsenic. It wasn't on the checklist. The assumption was that groundwater in the region was safe. That assumption was wrong. And by the time anyone realized, millions of people had been drinking arsenic-contaminated water for over a decade. Arsenic is a slow killer. It doesn't cause immediate symptoms. People can drink contaminated water for years before they get sick. The first sign is often skin changes, darkening, thickening, lesions that look like warts. Then come internal problems. Arsenic damages the liver, kidneys, lungs, and bladder. It causes cancer. Skin cancer, bladder cancer, lung cancer, kidney cancer. It weakens the immune system, making people vulnerable to infections. It affects the cardiovascular system, leading to heart disease and stroke. And it crosses the placenta, harming unborn children. Pregnant women who drink arsenic-contaminated water have higher rates of miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant mortality. The children who survive often suffer developmental delays, lower IQ, and lifelong health problems. The World Health Organization estimates that 1 in 10 tube wells in Bangladesh contains arsenic above the safe limit of 50 micrograms per liter. In some areas, contamination is far worse. Wells tested at over 500 micrograms per liter, 10 times the danger threshold. and many wells have never been tested at all. Families have no idea if their water is safe. They drink it because they have no choice. The scale of the disaster is staggering. Studies estimate that over 35 million people in Bangladesh were exposed to unsafe levels of arsenic in drinking water. By 2010, over 43,000 people had died from arsenic-related illnesses. Current estimates suggest the death toll exceeds 100,000 and rising. Over 5 million people currently show symptoms of arsenic poisoning: skin lesions, chronic cough, abdominal pain, numbness in hands and feet. These are the visible cases. Millions more carry arsenic in their bodies, slowly accumulating damage that will manifest as cancer or organ failure years from now. The latency period for arsenic-related cancer can be 20 years or more. People who drank contaminated water in the 1990s are being diagnosed with cancer today. And because Bangladesh has limited cancer treatment infrastructure, most of those people will die. The disaster is still unfolding. The deaths are still mounting. And the world has moved on. The social consequences are brutal. Arsenic poisoning carries a stigma. The skin lesions are visible and disfiguring. People with symptoms are ostracized, called cursed, accused of having contagious diseases. Women with arsenicosis, the medical term for chronic arsenic poisoning, are often abandoned by their husbands. Unmarried girls with skin lesions can't find partners. Families hide affected members out of shame. Men with visible symptoms lose jobs. Children are pulled out of school to avoid mockery. The illness destroys lives long before it kills, and there's no cure. Once arsenic is in the body, it causes permanent damage. Switching to safe water stops further exposure, but it doesn't reverse the harm. People with arsenicosis will carry the scars and the cancer risk for the rest of their lives. Medical treatment is limited to managing symptoms. Skin creams for lesions. Pain relief. Chemotherapy for those who develop cancer if they can afford it. Most can't. Rural Bangladeshis live on a few dollars a day. Cancer treatment costs thousands. Hospitals are far away. Transportation is expensive. So people suffer at home and they die at home, uncounted and unacknowledged. Why hasn't this been fixed? The answer is money, politics, and apathy. Fixing the arsenic crisis would require testing every well, marking contaminated ones, and providing alternative water sources. Testing alone is a massive undertaking. There are an estimated 10 million tube wells in Bangladesh. Testing each one costs money. The government has tested several million, but millions remain unchecked. Contaminated wells are supposed to be painted red as a warning. Safe wells are painted green, but the paint fades. Wells get repainted. People forget which is which. And in many villages, even if a well is marked red, people continue using it because there's no alternative. The nearest safe well might be kilometers away. Carrying water that distance every day isn't feasible for families, especially women and children who bear that burden. So they drink from the poisoned well and hope they'll be okay. Hope isn't a strategy, but when you're poor, it's often all you have. Alternative water sources exist but are expensive and inconsistent. Deep tube wells, drilled to over 150 meters, can access aquifers below the arsenic-contaminated layer, but drilling that deep costs significantly more. Many villages can't afford it. Pond sand filters and rainwater harvesting systems are cheaper but require maintenance and community organization. In some areas, they've been successful. In others, they've failed due to lack of funding, poor construction, or community disputes. Piped water systems, the gold standard, are available in cities but rare in rural areas. Extending the water network to remote villages would cost billions. The government has made efforts. International aid has provided funding, but progress is slow. Bureaucracy, corruption, and competing priorities drain resources, and the people most affected, poor, rural, politically powerless, have no way to demand faster action. They wait, they drink, they get sick, and they die. The international community has largely abandoned the issue. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the arsenic crisis was headline news. Documentaries were made, research papers published, aid money flowed. But by the 2010s, attention shifted to other crises: climate change, terrorism, refugees. Arsenic poisoning in Bangladesh became old news. Donor fatigue set in. Funding dried up. The NGOs that once led remediation efforts scaled back or left. And the Bangladeshi government, facing floods, cyclones, political instability, and a massive refugee influx from Myanmar, struggled to prioritize a slow-moving, invisible disaster. Arsenic doesn't make dramatic headlines. It doesn't kill overnight. It's not photogenic. The victims are poor and far from cameras. So the world forgets, and the poisoning continues. But Bangladesh isn't alone. Arsenic contamination affects groundwater in over 70 countries. India's West Bengal region, right next to Bangladesh, has the same problem. An estimated 6 million people there drink arsenic-laced water. In Pakistan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Nepal, and parts of China, arsenic in groundwater affects millions. In the United States, parts of the Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, California have arsenic-contaminated wells. In Argentina and Chile, arsenic in drinking water has caused health crises in rural areas. The difference: wealthier countries can afford to test, monitor, and provide alternatives. Poor countries can't. The pattern is always the same. The wells are drilled with good intentions. The water looks clean, people drink it for years, and by the time the arsenic is discovered, millions are already poisoned. The technology to remove arsenic from water exists: reverse osmosis, ion exchange, activated alumina filters, all of them work. But they're expensive and require trained operators and maintenance. For a village in rural Bangladesh surviving on subsistence farming, these solutions are out of reach. The global response has been to study the problem, publish reports, and move on. Meanwhile, the victims are left to fend for themselves. The tube well disaster is a case study in unintended consequences and the dangers of one-size-fits-all development. International agencies saw a problem, waterborne disease, and applied a solution that worked in other places. They didn't account for local geology, didn't test for arsenic because it wasn't a known risk in other regions where tube wells had been successful. The mistake was understandable, but the failure to respond adequately once the problem was discovered is not. By the mid-90s, scientists knew about the arsenic. They raised alarms, they published findings, and the response was bureaucratic, slow, and underfunded. People continued to drink poisoned water while agencies debated policy. Pilot projects were launched, studied, evaluated. Years passed, decades passed, and the poisoning accelerated. The lesson: when development projects go wrong, the consequences fall hardest on those least able to bear them. The aid workers and engineers who designed the tube well programs didn't drink the water. They left. The people of Bangladesh had no choice but to stay and drink. And here's the most disturbing part: the disaster is worsening. Climate change is making it worse. Rising sea levels increase saltwater intrusion into coastal aquifers, forcing people to drill deeper wells, often into arsenic-bearing layers. Increased flooding spreads contamination. Droughts lower water tables, concentrating arsenic in remaining water. The environmental stresses that Bangladesh faces in the coming decades will make the arsenic crisis harder, not easier, to solve. And the population continues to grow. More people, more demand for water, more exposure. Unless drastic action is taken, the death toll will climb into the millions. And the world will keep looking away because the victims are poor, brown, and far from the centers of power. Because slow disasters don't generate outrage. Because suffering that's chronic and invisible is easy to ignore. What can be done? First, comprehensive testing of every well. Mark contaminated wells clearly and enforce their closure. Second, fund and build alternative water sources, deep wells, pipe systems, rainwater harvesting, at scale. Third, provide free medical care and monitoring for affected populations. Fourth, hold the organizations that built the contaminated wells accountable. UNICEF and WHO made a mistake, but mistakes require accountability, public acknowledgement, compensation. Commitment to fix the problem they helped create. Fifth, global attention, and sustained funding. This isn't a problem Bangladesh can solve alone. The international community drilled the wells. The international community must help clean up the mess. And sixth, empower local communities. The solutions that work best are those designed and managed by the people who use them. Top-down aid often fails. Community-led initiatives succeed, but they need resources, training, and political support. The arsenic disaster in Bangladesh is still happening. Every day, children wake up and drink poisoned water. Every day, men and women develop lesions, cancers, organ failures. Every day, people die preventable deaths. And every day, the world does nothing. Not because we can't. Because we choose not to. Because the cost of fixing it is deemed too high. Because the victims don't have a voice loud enough to be heard over the noise of the news cycle. Because slow violence doesn't trend on social media, doesn't generate clicks, doesn't win elections, so it continues. The wells keep pumping. The poison keeps flowing. The bodies keep piling up. And history will record this as one of the greatest public health failures of the 21st century, not because we didn't know, but because we knew and did nothing. That's the truth about disasters that don't make headlines. They don't end. They just fade from view while the dying continues in silence.